Ever heard of a town where you'd be unwelcome after sunset just because of your race?
Yeah, it's a chilling thought for sure.
It is, right?
Yeah, those were sundown towns.
That was the reality of sundown towns.
Many across the U.S.
Yeah.
They used a lot of different tactics to keep non-white residents out after dark.
So today we're taking a deep dive into sundown towns.
Yeah.
We'll uncover how they operated, where they were,
Yeah.
and how their legacy might still impact us.
Yeah, so to really understand what sundown towns were about, you have to know the historical context.
Okay.
They were most common during the Jim Crow era,
Okay.
which was a period of intense racial segregation in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
It stretched from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century.
Okay, so let's dive into the mechanics of these sundown towns.
Yeah.
What were the rules like?
The rules were straightforward but incredibly cruel.
Okay.
Black people were allowed to work or shop in these towns during the day,
Right.
but they had to leave by sundown.
Wow. It's hard to imagine living with that kind of constant threat.
Yeah.
What happened if someone broke these rules?
The consequences were severe.
Okay.
Violating the sundown curfew could lead to arrests, violent attacks, or even worse.
Now, understanding where these towns were is crucial.
Yeah.
So where were they most prevalent?
Well, you might assume they were concentrated in the South.
Right, because of the history there.
Right, because of its history of racial tensions.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, the Midwest actually had the highest density of sundown towns.
That is surprising.
Yeah.
What factors contributed to this concentration in the Midwest?
Well, there are a few theories.
Right.
Some historians point to the Great Migration
Okay.
of African Americans from the South to northern cities in the early 20th century.
Okay.
So this influx of Black residents into previously predominantly white communities may have fueled anxieties and led to efforts to maintain racial boundaries.
Okay.
Also, we can't overlook the role of economic competition. In many Midwestern towns, Black residents were seen as a threat to white workers and businesses.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It highlights how racial prejudice is often intertwined with economic anxiety.
Exactly.
Power dynamics, right.
Absolutely.
But how do researchers actually confirm a town's sundown status?
Well, there's a rigorous process.
Right.
Researchers carefully examine historical documents,
Okay.
like newspaper articles,
Okay.
county histories,
Yeah.
and even records from the Works Progress Administration.
Okay.
Sometimes the absence of Black residents in census data,
Uh-huh.
coupled with other evidence, can also be a telling sign.
It seems like piecing together a historical puzzle,
Yes,
uncovering these hidden chapters in our past.
absolutely.
And speaking of uncovering, let's look at some specific examples of sundown towns.
Yes.
Right here in Arizona,
Okay.
towns like Tempe,
Hmm.
Scottsdale,
Yeah.
and Prescott have been identified as having sundown pasts.
Wow.
This is a chilling reminder that this wasn't just a distant phenomenon.
Right.
It happened right in our own backyard.
And to further illustrate the impact, let's delve into a particularly notorious example.
Right.
Vidor, Texas.
Now, Vidor is infamous for its well-documented history as a sundown town.
Yeah.
Shockingly, incidents of racial violence and intimidation persisted there well into the late 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
It forces us to confront how deeply entrenched these discriminatory practices were in some communities.
Vidor serves as a potent example,
Right.
but it's just one among many.
Yeah.
From Anna, Illinois, where signs explicitly warn Black people to leave,
Wow.
to Cairo, Illinois, known for its racial tension and violence against Black residents,
Yeah.
to Columbia, Mississippi, notorious for its brutal enforcement of sundown policies.
Wow.
Each of these towns carries a heavy burden of history.
It's clear that while many of these towns have evolved and progressed over time,
Yeah,
the legacy of their sundown pasts continues to shape social dynamics,
absolutely.
perceptions in the very fabric of those communities.
It really does.
And this leads to a crucial question. Do sundown towns in some form still exist today?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
While outright signage and blatant violence might be gone,
Yeah.
could there be more subtle forms of exclusion persisting in certain communities?
That's a question we'll delve into further in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But before we move on, I'm curious, what are your initial thoughts on this? What strikes you as particularly impactful or surprising about the history of sundown towns? Hold on to those thoughts as we explore the lasting implications and potential modern-day echoes of this dark chapter in American history?
I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a complex question
Yeah?
with no easy answers.
Right.
Some argue that while official sundown policies are gone, certain communities might still exhibit patterns of exclusion. This could take various forms,
Okay.
from housing discrimination and limited access to resources to a pervasive feeling of not being welcome.
So it's like the ghost of Sundown Town still lingering in some places, even if not as overtly as before.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
It reminds us that progress isn't always linear.
Right.
And even when laws change, deeply ingrained attitudes and social structures can take much longer to shift.
This makes me wonder about the long-term consequences for the communities targeted by these sundown policies.
Yeah.
It's not just about a town being unwelcoming after dark.
Right.
It's about generations of people being impacted.
The impact is multifaceted and profound.
Yeah.
Imagine the psychological toll on individuals and families who lived under constant threat and fear. The trauma and humiliation they experienced undoubtedly had long-lasting consequences.
That's a perspective I hadn't fully considered before.
Yeah.
The psychological impact on entire communities.
Yeah, it's an essential part of understanding the true cost of sundown towns.
Yeah.
And beyond the psychological impact, there were also severe economic consequences.
Okay.
Black families were systematically denied access to land ownership,
Yeah.
business opportunities, and resources that would allow them to build wealth and achieve economic stability.
Right.
This forced migration also disrupted social networks and community ties, further hindering their ability to thrive.
So it's like a ripple effect that continues to spread across generations.
Exactly.
The effects of these policies weren't just confined to a specific time period.
Right.
They continue to shape the present.
Precisely. We can see this in the disparities in wealth, educational attainment, and health outcomes that persist today.
Right.
These disparities are deeply rooted in historical injustices, including the legacy of sundown towns.
It's a powerful reminder that the past isn't truly past.
Yeah,
It's interwoven with our present reality.
it is.
So given these long-lasting consequences, what steps can we take to address this legacy? How can we move from awareness to action?
There are many ways to contribute to positive change.
Okay.
Supporting organizations that actively work to dismantle racial inequities is crucial. Advocating for policies that promote fair housing and economic opportunities can create more equitable conditions for all.
Okay.
And engaging in open and honest conversations about race and discrimination within our communities can help challenge ingrained biases and foster understanding.
It sounds like it requires a multi-pronged approach,
Yeah,
tackling this complex issue from different angles.
absolutely.
It can't just be about individual actions.
Right.
Systemic change is also essential.
Absolutely. We need to address the root causes of inequality,
Yeah.
challenge discriminatory practices, and create a society where everyone feels safe, welcome, and valued,
Right.
regardless of their race or ethnicity. This deep dive into sundown towns has brought to light a chilling chapter of American history,
Yeah.
and it raises important questions about how we define and build truly inclusive communities.
This has been both enlightening and unsettling.
Yeah.
It shed light on a part of American history that I honestly wasn't fully aware of before. It makes you question assumptions about places we might consider open and welcoming. Could there be subtle remnants of these exclusionary practices still at play, even in places we wouldn't expect?
It's a history many people are unaware of,
Right.
which is precisely why it's crucial to bring these stories to light.
Yeah.
The more we understand our past, the better equipped we are to create a more just and equitable future.
Well said. This deep dive has given me a new perspective on the complexities of race and inequality in America.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, what about you, our listener? What stands out to you as particularly impactful or thought-provoking from what we've discussed?
Yeah.
What questions or reflections has this conversation sparked for you?
As we wrap up our exploration of sundown towns, it strikes me that this isn't just about acknowledging past wrongs.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how those injustices continue to shape our present and influence our future.
Right.
It's about looking at seemingly neutral policies or practices with a more critical eye. What's fascinating is that the conversation about sundown towns compels us to re-examine the very concept of community.
Yeah.
Who is included, who is excluded,
Mhm.
and how are those boundaries drawn both visibly and invisibly?
You're right. It makes you question assumptions about places we consider open and welcoming.
Yeah.
Could there be subtle remnants of these exclusionary practices still at play, even in places we wouldn't expect?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it challenges us to consider how seemingly neutral policies or practices might have unintended consequences that disproportionately affect certain groups.
Yeah.
Take housing, for example.
Right.
Policies like zoning regulations or lending practices, while seemingly race-neutral, can sometimes perpetuate patterns of segregation and limit access to opportunity.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Like peeling back the layers and seeing how seemingly unrelated things can actually be connected to historical patterns of exclusion.
Right.
We've talked a lot about the historical context, the mechanics of sundown towns, and their lasting impact. But what about the individual stories?
Yeah.
The human cost of these policies?
That's where it becomes truly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Imagine the fear,
Yeah.
the humiliation, the constant threat of violence hanging over your head simply because you dared to exist in a certain space after dark.
It's awful.
These weren't just abstract policies. They had real, tangible consequences on people's lives, their families, their hopes, and their dreams.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And the generations of families who were uprooted, forced to leave their homes and livelihoods behind, simply because of the color of their skin.
Yeah.
It's a loss that echoes through time.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about the lived experiences of real people.
Right.
And those stories deserve to be heard, remembered, and honored.
Absolutely. And as we conclude our deep dive into the unsettling world of sundown towns, I think we're left with more than just information. We're left with a responsibility.
A responsibility to learn from the past, to challenge present-day injustices, and to actively create communities that are truly inclusive and equitable for all.
So to our listener, as you go about your day, your week, your life, we leave you with this. What can you do in your own sphere of influence to dismantle the remnants of exclusionary practices and foster a sense of belonging for everyone?